Hi everyone, and welcome to the third review video for the Biology or Living Environments regions. This is Unit 1, Topic 3. So the first thing you want to know for this topic is microscopes and the steps to focus using a microscope. So the first thing you want to do is to center the specimen on your plate and then use the coarse adjustment knob to help focus it. The coarse adjustment knob is the larger of the two knobs, which I will circle in a second. And what it does is only turning it a little bit creates a large change. So here it is, it's that large one I just circled. So changing the coarse adjustment knob by a little bit will create a big change with the magnification because it moves the plate by a larger amount. And once you've used the coarse adjustment knob, your second step is to move to the fine adjustment knob, which is the smaller of the two knobs, which I'll also circle in a second. The fine adjustment knob works in smaller increments, so changing this has a smaller change, which is why you only use it to get very specific focus after you used the coarse adjustment knob. So here it is circled right there, just beneath the coarse adjustment knob. And then the third step for focusing, you don't need to do in every scenario, but if the image is too dark, then you want to adjust the diaphragm. So the diaphragm, when you change that, it adjusts the amount of light that gets through past the specimen, which can help you see it brighter or dimmer. So this is the diaphragm right there beneath the plate, which can change the amount of light that gets through. So the next thing you need to understand about microscopes is how to calculate total magnification. And this trips a lot of people up because they forget that it's a compound microscope with multiple lenses. So the most important one that people forget is the ocular lens, otherwise called the eyepiece. The ocular lens is at the top, which means that every time you view something, it goes through the ocular lens, which has its own magnification. And the second thing are the objective lenses, which is the one everyone remembers, as those are the lenses you can change, which often have magnifications of 4x, 10x, or 40x. So when you're calculating your total magnification, you want to multiply the ocular lens, which has a magnification of 10x. So you do 10x times whatever the objective lens is. So that could be either 4x, 10x, or 40x, depending on what you decided. And if it's a different microscope, it can change, but those are the compound microscopes that we typically use. And multiplying those together give you your total magnification. So the important thing with this is to remember that there is a 10x magnification coming through the ocular lens, or the eyepiece. Now, when you're measuring under a microscope, there are some key things you want to remember when you're switching from low power to high power. So when you go from this low power to high power, the first change is with your field of view. The field of view is really how much you see of the organism. So like how much of the entire organism you see, and this field of view decreases. And the reason this decreases is because you're seeing part of the organism in greater detail, but that means that you see less of the entire organism, just more of a specific portion. The second thing is that the brightness, or how bright the organism appears, would decrease, which happens because you're seeing there's less space, it's more focused, which means that there's less area or space for the light to go through, so less light passes through the eyepiece and reaches your eyes. And then the third thing you see is that the apparent size of the image, or how large you perceive the specimen to be, would increase because you're effectively moving closer to it and viewing it in greater detail. So it'll appear larger than it did when you were looking at it through a lower power. Okay, the next thing you need to know for this topic are cells. There are two main types of cells. The first are eukaryotic cells, which make up more complex organisms, such as plants and animals. These are categorized by containing membrane-bound organelles, and specifically the nucleus, which holds DNA. The second type of cells you need to know are prokaryotic cells, which are simpler cells and make up more less complex organisms, only single unicellular organisms like bacteria cells. These have no organelles, and also that means no nucleus, as a nucleus is an organelle. So that's how to differentiate between the two. And now looking at eukaryotic cells, there are specific organelles that we want to know. So the first is the cell membrane, which controls what enters and exits the cell. The cell membrane is very similar to the human excretory system, as it controls what it allows to leave the cell, and it also can dictate what it allows to enter. There's a whole unit on the cell membrane, which we will look at in a second. It's the barrier between the inside of the cell and the outside. The second organelle you want to know is the cytoplasm, which is the liquid that holds organelles together. All of the organelles in the cell are floating around inside of the cytoplasm, as it's the liquid that fills the entire cell. These also have a key role in transport, as any time you transport substances from one organelle to the other, or outside or into the cell, it has to pass through the cytoplasm. The third thing you want to know are vacuoles, which are often small and many in animals and very large in plants, and these are storages of food and water. So in the vacuoles, you hold nutrients that can be used later for other various cell processes, and it helps to keep nutrients or other things that are in the cell. Next is a very important one, which is the nucleus, which controls the cell because as it houses all the genetic information. So all the DNA in the cell is going to be found inside of the nucleus, and that basically gives instructions to the rest of the cell for how it operates. Next are ribosomes, which can be found both free-floating in the cytoplasm, or they can be found attached to the rough ER or endoplasmic reticulum, which is why it's called rough because it has the ribosomes attached. And these ribosomes' roles are to synthesize or to make proteins. That means that when the RNA is transcribed and moved, it is translated in the ribosomes, where it is then used to create proteins. Next is the mitochondria, which everyone remembers as the powerhouse of the cell. The mitochondria is the site of cellular respiration. So this is where the glucose goes to produce ATP that is used by the rest of the cell and the entire body for various different functions. Now, these next two are special because they're only found in plants. The first is the chloroplast, which is where photosynthesis occurs. It's the site of photosynthesis, which is where the cell, we learned a lot about photosynthesis. It's where the cell creates nutrients that it can be used for other cell processes using light. And the final one is the cell wall, which is also only found in plants. This is a rigid structure that helps to support the cell and provide shape. So this gives it that square-ish or a rigid shape we think of when we think of a plant cell. It goes outside of the cell membrane, and it basically helps to prevent the cell from collapsing or falling inwards or expanding too greatly. It gives it a rigid structure and shape. So the final thing about cells you'll know for this topic is the level of organization, specifically in multicellular organisms. So the most specific part that even makes up cells are the organelles we just looked at. So the organelles are really the smallest unit for these organizations. When you have all these organelles together, that creates the cell. And cells, some organisms just have organelles in cells, like unicellular organisms. But for multicellular organisms, multiple cells coming together form tissues. And now these large tissues, like muscle tissues, if they come together, multiple tissues can then form organs. For example, the heart is a collection of various muscle tissues. Multiple organs together can then form an organ system. For example, running with the heart example, the heart along with various blood vessels helps to form the circulatory system. And finally, multiple organ systems coming together help to form the entire organism, such as humans being made of multiple systems like the circulatory system, respiratory system, nervous system, and a bunch of others. Okay, time for some review questions. So the first, we have which sequence best represents increasing complexity? So we look at tissues. The first one is tissues to cells, which we can already cross out because we know that multiple cells together form tissues, not the other way around. The second one says cells to organelles to organs. So we can also cross this one out because we know that organelles are not made by cells, but organelles are the specific subsections that are found within cells. The third one says organelles to cells to tissues to organs. So this one would be our answer because organelles make up cells, which then help to make up tissues and organs. So number 3 is our answer. And just to be safe, we'll check number 4, which is that organism goes to cells, which we definitely know is not the answer because organism is the largest unit and cells are the smallest. Okay, so our next review question is the cytoplasm in a single-celled organism and the circulatory system in a human both, either one, break down molecules into smaller components, which we know is not true because not only does the cytoplasm not break down smaller components, but neither does the circulatory system in humans. The second is release energy to be used throughout the organism. That's not true because the cytoplasm doesn't release energy, that's the mitochondria through cellular respiration, and neither does the circulatory system. The third is that it transports substances throughout the organism, which would be true, which is also our answer, because the cytoplasm transports things like proteins and mRNA, and the circulatory system transports blood. And then our final answer, which I guess is kind of the trick one, is number 4 that says distribute blood to all parts of the organism. The reason that's not the answer is because there's no blood within the cytoplasm. Blood is made up of various cells like red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, which means that the cytoplasm can't be transporting blood because it's much larger than things that would be found within the cell. Okay, so our next one is a question about microscopes. So it says, the image of the specimen viewed using high power with this microscope will appear larger than when viewed from using low power. State one other way the image of the specimen as seen using high power would differ from the image seen using low power. So this is asking us about the changes that occur when you switch from low power to high power. So there are multiple changes we can say. One is that the image will appear larger, which means the apparent size is true. is going to be larger. A second one we can do, which I'll write down here, is that the brightness will decrease, which was one of the ones we discussed above, as less light is able to reach through. So brightness, there would be less brightness. Another one you could say, one it already said was the apparent size, and the other one you can say is that your field of view would also decrease, but you only need to write one because it's just 1 point. Next, question 49 is a magnification question using the high power objective. So we see on here that there are two objectives we can use. One that's a 10x objective over here, and one that's a 43x objective. Obviously, the 43x would be the higher power objective because 43 is higher than 10. And the trick is that the answer is not 43 because it's a compound lens. If I scroll up here, we can also see that there is the eyepiece, which has a magnification of 10x. So what you would have to do is multiply the ocular lens by the objective lens to get your answer of D, which is 430. And now we have one final review question. If I scroll down. And this says, the letters in the diagram indicate some parts of a cell. The function of which cell part is most similar to that of the human excretory system. So I think the first thing we should do is label the different organelles. So A represents the cell membrane. On the outside is it's the barrier between the inside and outside of the cell. B would represent the nucleus, and inside it is all the DNA for the cell. C represents the cytoplasm, as it's in between all the organelles. And finally, D would represent the mitochondria, the sites of cell respiration. So now we have to ask which one is most similar to the human excretory system. And the answer to this one would be A, because the cell membrane is most similar to the human excretory system. We know the human excretory system controls what exits the human body, and the cell membrane controls what exits the cell. So our answer would be A. And that's all. Thank you.